The next two speakers, I think, don't need too much introduction, but I'd love for you to introduce yourselves. So we have a bit of a provocation, which I'm super excited to get into. We have Kirk Havenkotter, Executive Director of Transportation Choices Coalition, joined by Paulo Nunes-Bueno. I always get that wrong, I'm so sorry. With so much past experience in this region, advocating tirelessly for active transportation, whether it be through institutions like Seattle Children's, through SDOT, but also through his own consulting experiences, and even working with Amazon for. So I think without further ado, I'd like to bring you both up. And I think the format is going to be a conversation.
So you're not going to do slides? You're going to do some slides, right?
You did have slides.
Yeah.
Oh, I apologize. I will get that set up.
But well, I can go first because I didn't make any slides, and I'll set up the conversation. So I was director of transportation at Seattle Children's Hospital for about 8 years, and it was this incredible journey because the hospital was growing. It needed to grow, but all of the neighbors were like, no, we can't have a hospital in my neighborhood, even though there was a hospital when they bought their house. And it was this real pressure cooker situation. And one day I stepped out of my office and this kid popped up and he said, "Hey, I'm your new intern." And I didn't know that. I was like, we don't have an internship program. And it was Kirk. And he he just like invented that there was an internship program and that he was going to be the intern. And we've been friends ever since. And every once in a while we get together and we have these long sessions. Sometimes it's like walking all through Brooklyn, over the Brooklyn Bridge and to downtown. And sometimes it's just at a bar. And essentially what it is why is everything so messed up and does it have to be this way? Or how can we get good, better done faster, sooner, cheaper? And we're going to invite you to one of these conversations today. So Kirk is the Executive Director of Transportation Choices Coalition, which is an incredible organization that advocates for good things in transportation, and an organization from whose board I was fired from before Kirk was a. So we have such like long history together that you're gonna. And the reason, and this is actually, I didn't mean to talk about this, but now here we are. The reason why I was fired from his board, long before he was even a candidate to be the paper boy for the, much less the executive director, was that there was a compromise that was hatched in Olympia that said we're going to fund an enormous investment in highways and a little bit, or maybe a significant increase in transit and active transportation investments. And this was a long time ago. It was what, 2012? It was a long time ago. And I and one other board member out of principle said, well, we're the Transportation Choices Coalition. Maybe a huge expansion of highways is not the thing we should be supporting. We should say no to this. And then they fired me from the board. But I was vindicated by history because what happens is right after that, a transit-only measure was put forward and it passed. Now, Kirk is coming back from Olympia, where he has been in skirmishes all month to do something really, really significant, that speaks to what the mayor was just talking about in some really significant ways. But I think that the thing that I want to sort of leave this intro with is that we need to speak up, like the mayor said, and we need to use a sense of urgency, right? The goal of what we do cannot be public engagement. It cannot end there. Yes, it's a necessary part of what we do, but the situation where we are now with the climate, the situation where we are now with, like the mayor said, of people being disconnected in terms of the epidemic of loneliness that we have, there is an urgency that we get done now, right? That we get stuff done now that we've been putting off for years and years and years. And there are reasons. We have made choices for why things are so difficult to do, for why things are so slow in order to achieve the progress that we need to do. And I had the other privilege of being the transportation policy lead for an environmental justice organization, another great organization here in Washington called Front and Centered. And one approach that we took to this work was that we stole from Timothy Snyder, who's a student, he's a teacher of history and focuses on autocracy. And it's this really clear recipe. We need to establish rights. Mobility is a right. Transportation access is a right. All of the things that the mayor talked about are access to the goods that society provides. Joining the wrestling team, going across the street to getting your blood pressure checked, connecting with your neighbors. The price of admission to those things cannot be owning and driving and being able to afford a car, right? These things, ultimately, what they represent is freedom, right? The most fundamental right that we have is the right to mobility, the right to freedom. So number one step is establish rights. Number two step, show where those rights are being violated. And number three, fight for justice, right? The work that we're doing here is very, very clearly a fight for justice, right? And there's the imperative of the climate, and there's the imperative of us as a society, but then there's just a fundamental right to justice that we, in the way that we've designed our society, are leaving people out. In comes young Kirk Hovenkotter, pops up and he says, "I'm your new intern," and then goes out and changes the world. Really. And we're going to hear about this, and we're going to have a kind of bull session together with you in the same way that we did before, that we do together when we're getting drunk or walking around Brooklyn. And I'm wondering, because I've been noticing, because I was here yesterday, the whole business with the microphone with the audience is really clunky. How many people do we have on Zoom right now? Oh, so there are a lot of people. Okay, sorry, people on Zoom. I was about to cut you loose. All right. Okay, so now I'm gonna hand it off to Kirk, and then we'll pick it up again.
Well, I don't know about you all, but I'm really ready to go run up a mountain, go into battle, that inspirational speech. I don't know. I just want to say, since we're at a roast now, we are so incredibly lucky to have Paulo working in this community. His vision, his ambition, his urgency, and his commitment to doing the right thing has been something that's guided me for so long, and he's just been an incredible mentor and friend, and we are just stupidly lucky to have Paulo committed and caring about this place. And while I'm gushing, I want to give a huge thank you to Anat, Tanisha, Amara for organizing this incredible conference. I feel incredibly lucky to be one of these panelists and to work with the Tasker Center. Seeing just the conversations and the panelists that we have, it's just an incredible reunion tour for me to see folks like Eric Plosky, Greg Nance, Brian Ferris, people who have made incredible differences in people's lives across the country here talking with this group. So Anat, Tanisha, Amara, thank you so much for making today possible.
I'm the one who should be grateful. You know, everybody asks me why I do this every year because it's a bit of a lift, but like the lift I get from hearing what all of you are doing all the time, every day, is just incredible. So thank you all. But that's not to put away what the incredible work that TCC is doing, and I cannot wait to hear it.
Yeah. Well, so Paulo gave me the best intro I could ever ask for, but I'm Kirk Hovenkotter. I'm the Executive Director of Transportation Choices Coalition. If you're not familiar with Transportation Choices Coalition, we are Washington State's nonprofit advocate for safe, sustainable, and equitable transportation. We've been a coalition of business, labor, transit agencies, elected leaders, and most importantly, transit riders for over 32 years, beating the drums for more frequent transit and safe walks to transit. And we do that through our work in the state legislature, really cyberbullying state legislators like Representative Nance, who's going to be here later, to fund more transit and safe walks to transit. We do organizing of transit riders across the state in communities like Wenatchee and the Tri-Cities to organize for more investments in transit service and help them push back against their transit agency board members, some elected officials who want to cut their sales tax to provide less transit service. But we're most known for our work passing ballot measure campaigns. We got to work with some incredible partners, some who are in the room last year, to pass the Seattle Transportation Levy, and we're most known for our campaigns in 2016 and 2008 to pass light rail. And here's a photo of the most important element of Transportation Choices Coalition is our 8 incredible staff who are working for a state of 8 million people to win those ballot measure campaigns, to organize with transit riders to amplify their voices. And I really think at the core of what Transportation Choices Coalition is we're a democracy-building organization. We're helping people train their voice, use their voice, and in response to the mayor's call, to use that to make change in their community and figure out how they can do that. And key to how we do that is by leading advocacy trainings. We have partnered with Snoqualmie Valley Mobility Coalition and HopeLink, one of the sponsors for this, to do a Rural Transportation Advocacy 101 that's going to be happening in June. And we also do a lot of work in helping people tell their story to help make that change. And key to that is also giving people opportunities to get involved. This is a photo of the Keep Seattle Moving campaign, which won at the ballot last year, which made a generational investment in sidewalks. And we all know that everyone's trip to transit starts at their front door. This is a photo of light rail opening in Linwood last year. This was a huge opening, and it's such an exciting investment. But we know that transit won't work if you don't have a safe, accessible way to get to it. We also know that Washington State is in the midst of a traffic safety crisis. This is a ghost bike on a roadway in our community, which signifies when someone was killed in one of our on one of our streets walking. In 2023, we had more people killed or seriously injured in our roadways than any year on record. And every one of those is a tragedy. We faced that last year when our bookkeeper at Transportation Choices Coalition was killed on I-5 when she had stopped to help someone whose car had broken down on the side of the road. It sucks, it's painful, it's sad, and everyone, I'm certain almost everyone in this room knows someone who's been affected by traffic violence. We also know where the most dangerous roadways are in our communities. These are state-owned roadways that are owned and managed by the state and run through our busiest, densest urban areas. And the roadway the mayor was talking about that's owned by the state is one of those roadways. It's known as a Main Street highway. And I'm certain, I have a photo up here of Division Avenue in Spokane, which is one of these Main Street highways. I'm certain every single one of you in this room knows the Main Street highway in your community. It's typically the busiest, the grodiest, the widest, the most stressful road to walk on, and one that probably doesn't have sidewalks or doesn't have accessible sidewalks. 47% of the people who are killed or seriously injured in our state occur on state-owned roadways. And these Main Street highways are especially bad you're twice as likely to be in a fatal collision on one of these roadways than other state-owned roadways like a freeway or a rural roadway outside of an urban area. And these roadways are not just a Western Washington problem, they are across our state. These are roadways like Aurora in Shoreline and Seattle. They're Division Avenue in Spokane. It's Pacific Avenue in Tacoma. It's Highway 101 through Port Angeles. It's Highway 2 through Monroe. It's Wheaton Way through East Bremerton. These are the roadways that are the main streets for so many communities. We have so many businesses along them. These roadways were initially built to connect communities, but as our communities grew and more homes and businesses grew up alongside them, they became busier and busier and became the main streets for these communities. But the state hasn't kept up in its responsibility to make these great streets that these communities deserve. These streets are also, and I'm showing up here, this last slide was a map from the Washington State Department of Transportation highlighting in red where the main street highways are across the state. And you see them running across some of our small town communities east of the mountains and west of the mountains. And these roadways are not only some of the busiest transit corridors in our state, they're also where we're putting so much of our housing. If you ride some of the busiest bus lines in the state, Rapid Ride E, Community Transit's Swift Blue Line, Pierce Transit's One Line, Spokane, or these lines are some of the busiest bus routes. And if we're going to encourage people to take transit and have safe walks to transit, we need to make sure that these main street highways are safe. And they're also where we're putting so much of our housing. I can promise you that in every comprehensive plan that's being done right now across the state, that our communities are upzoning the properties along these roadways and adding more housing there. We need to make these roadways safe for the communities who live there today and for the people who are going to live there. And this is a photo of a housing, an apartment building up in Aurora in Seattle that just went up recently. But luckily, we know how to make these roadways safe. We know that if we invest in accessible sidewalks, more frequent intersections with signalized crosswalks and crossings, if we have median refuge islands that make it easier for you to cross in 1 signal time or 2 signal times, as well as investing in better bus stops and bus lanes, we can speed up transit service, we can make it safe to walk along these roadways, we can make it safe to cross these roadways, and we can also make transit work better and leave streets that these communities deserve and streets these communities can be proud of. And we know that our state can tackle big problems. When it puts its mind, money, and might to a problem, we can do transformational things. You can see this project that I'm showing. It's the 520 floating bridge. It's right outside the window here. This was a multi-billion-dollar investment over decades. It was a $5 billion investment over 15 years to build a floating bridge to connect our Fortune 1 company in Redmond to our Fortune 2 company here in Seattle. We also have mega projects for freight. We have mega projects like the Puget Sound Gateway project that is just about to open, which is another multi-billion-dollar project over decades to make it easier for freight to get to the Port of Tacoma and to SeaTac Airport. What Transportation Choices Coalition is calling for is a mega project for safety. Thanks, Paula. We're calling for a multi-billion-dollar investment over decades in these roadways that we know are dangerous, need improvement. And we want the state to bring the same commitment it does to freight and floating bridges that it does to our communities, our safety, and accessibility. And we deserve that. So right now in the legislature, we are calling for this. And this is not only something that we're calling for, it's something that people are recognizing. In the Seattle Times, it was the traffic safety crisis was covered, and we got to highlight the need for this investment and this mega project approach there. Former Secretary Roger Millar also highlighted the need for this, calling for $150 million a year to invest in these roadways that he lovingly calls stroads. I want people to eventually fall in love with these roadways, so I try and stay away from the word strode, which is such a negative connotation. But we're already seeing what these investments could look like here in Seattle. I'm curious. This is a photo from the Aurora Reimagined Coalition and their work with the Seattle Department of Transportation, working on a redesign of Aurora. Can folks raise their hands? Is anyone involved with the Aurora Reimagined Coalition here in the work on Aurora? Just volunteering, being a part of, following. This is a transformational project looking at how we fix 15 blocks of Aurora in North Seattle that don't have sidewalks, that are unsafe, where we see so many collisions. This investment to kick off this project was done in 2022 with a $50 million investment. We were proud to help win an additional $30 million for it in the Seattle Transportation Levy. So this is a $80 million investment that we're seeing today to invest in this. We want this to not be a one-off investment, which is why we were so excited to see in the state legislatures, the Senate Transportation's budget this week that came out, an investment of $450 million over 6 years for projects like this. That means $75 million a year to fix these roadways. That would be like one of these Aurora projects every single year in a community. And that's huge because these are big projects that will put working Washingtonians to work. This is a photo in California of someone doing a Main Street highway rebuild. And we hear questions from some of our labor partners. Are these projects that big? Are they going to put people to work? Is this something we should support? These floating bridges and freight projects put thousands of people to work. And these projects will. These are huge projects over blocks that need total street redesigns and rebuilds. And this is why we're pitching to our labor partners that this is something they need to get behind and should get behind, and it's going to create great jobs here in Washington State, not just on the west side of the mountains, but across Washington State. So I mentioned there's that $450 million investment in the state legislature this week. That investment, it's not for certain. The legislature is about to go into conference between the Senate Transportation Committee and the House Transportation Committee. And we need to ensure that those investments maintain when they go through conference and that we can protect that $450 million investment. That's huge. We want to thank our state Senate leaders for including that, but it's at risk. And we know that we don't have time to waste. This is a photo up on Aurora on that stretch where if anyone's ever been up there, you know it's awful. It's miserable. There is no sidewalk. You are walking in the street to be able to get to your destination along that roadway. And before I even met Paulo, I taught pedestrian safety education for second graders at Seattle Public Schools. And I taught at a school right up here off of Bitter Lake and would hear stories from students walking up to that school along Aurora Avenue. And it hit me at that moment. Why was I asking these 8-year-olds to walk more safely to school when they don't even have a sidewalk to do it, when the adults haven't invested in that? So that changed my life. It made me reach out to Paulo. It made me show up at Paulo's doorstep. And I'm excited to be able to continue to move this work forward. But my ask for everyone in this room here, sorry, this is one photo of us presenting this at the state legislature to the Washington State Senate Transportation Committee. The one thing I would ask for everyone in this room to do is, one, to visit transportationchoicescoalition.org/safety. I'm showing a one-pager here with that URL, asking for people to come check out this one-pager. And we also currently have an action alert up there. We would love for you to take just 5 minutes, look at that action alert, press send on it, and send an email to the members of the Senate Transportation Committee saying that this investment is important for me and I want you to keep it in the budget. That is what's going to help make sure this investment continues. So one, thank you so much for your time. I'm so excited to have this discussion with Paulo and just so excited to hear from all of you how we can further this work. So thank you so much for your time. How should we do this, Paulo?
Told you, right? Well, the first question that I have is this on? Yeah. Is there an opportunity during reconciliation for public comment?
No. during reconciliation between the House and Senate, they go into conference where they discuss behind closed doors what a combined bill should look like. That, or a combined transportation budget should look like. That will come out to the public, and there will be a moment for public comment then. But that's when we'll know whether it's included or not.
So we're in a black box period right now.
Right now, we have key leverage. It's in the Senate's budget. It's not in the House's budget. And the way that we're going to help give folks in the Senate the support they need to go in those conversations to say this is something that people want is by hearing from you all, as the mayor said. And so if you can take 5 minutes to go onto transportationchoices.org/safety, find that action alert, and send an email, that's one of the most important things we can do.
So sidebar on this incredibly exciting project is the funding for OS Connect, which was slated to be $10 million over 2 biennium, over 4 years, is in the Senate budget, but is not in the House budget. So same situation as the mega projects for highways. So if you do go over there and click on, are they able to customize the message?
Yes.
So what our ask of you is do everything that Kirk said, and then say, please include the extra $5 million for the second biennium of the OS Connect project. It could be a little note. All right, so Kirk, why take the mega project approach?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what we've seen is, if you look out this window to State Route 520, that's a project that was started, and the idea for it came out in the Clinton administration. It's been around for a long time. And the way that it's continued through the Great Recession, through the pandemic recession, through so many changes in political leadership, is because it was designed as a mega project in the Washington State Department of Transportation's budget. It was its own line item. It was its own focus. And it was leaders were able to say, we want to continue to put money into this project going forward. And it really cut through the bureaucracy. It was its own project. And it had huge sponsors. It had people who saw this as my mega project, political leaders who really committed their own support to this. And also, we want this mega projects approach because these are big projects. They put people to work. It's a big challenge. This is a big investment. And we need to treat building sidewalks like we do building highways for freight, like we do building highways for 520. And the big thing for me, if we can show that we can create jobs, we can put people to work, that gives us something to say yes to, so we can strongly say no to freeway expansion and highway expansion across the state.
Please clap.
No.
Sorry, that is the last time I know did make a Jeb Bush quote. So I think that this is such a critical point. This is like a real pivot point in our advocacy, right? Because for years we've gotten so good at saying no, no, no to the bad stuff, and we had no equivalent magnitude of good stuff to say yes to. So what does that do, right? First of all, that makes us be really bad company, all right? Because all we're saying is, no, 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 stop, stop, stop. Nobody wants to be around that person. And number two, we don't have allies that are in our corner when all we're saying is no, right? So Kirk is talking about labor. That is critical for the long-term success of these things. Something else that's critical to the long-term success of these things are these big construction companies, right? They've gotten good at what they do by doing big projects. And we will never, at the pace that we are building sidewalks now, get to a place where we can even remotely call justice if we're taking the approach that we're taking now, right? We need to leverage the learning by doing that these companies have done. We need to, frankly, we need to leverage their political pull. We need to be able to show that there is a sustained major piece of work here for these companies and have them fight it out to get it, and so that they are on our side building the stuff that we need, right? Because ultimately, if I say to a company, hey, there's 3 blocks of sidewalks that you could bid on, or there is a 15-year mega project on a floating bridge here, which one are you going to go out and get your smartest person in Olympia and advocate for? It's a no-brainer, right? So what we've been talking about, I think we started talking about this, I don't know, a couple of years ago, of how we need to, these are not micro projects, right? These are generational, life-changing projects that we desperately need. And how do we get our dollars and our politics to align with that, right? When I first started at Children's, I don't know that you ever met her. Her name was Stephanie Axelrod, and she told me something that just like cracked my brain open. It was my first week when I was going around, and I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? I don't even, very similar to what the mayor was just saying. And then she said, you know what? Transportation is not Paulo's problem. Paulo's problem is making transportation the hospital's problem. And it was this, like, it just stopped me in my tracks. Oh, this is a multi-billion-dollar-a-year organization, and I'm just one person. Unless I make it clear to them that making the streets around the hospital safer, that reducing the number of people that are driving to the hospital, that being the gold standard of how you do an employer transportation program, that unless we do this, we won't get to build our hospital, then I won't be successful. And I think Kirk has been really brilliant at making safety the legislature's problem, right? So that we have a Secretary of Transportation or we have the chair on both the House and the Senate Transportation Committees that understand this. Do they need more pressure? Yes. We're really, really, really needing your help to keep the pressure up so that we don't cheese out on yet another generational opportunity to get justice for the things that we need. All right. So, Kirk, are we going to get this done this year?
I really hope so. One, to be honest, I don't know, but I'm gonna do the hardest work I can to make sure it's in there, and getting help from folks right now to express their thoughts and express their support is how we're gonna make sure that's done.
I want to talk a little bit about Bothell, the experience in Bothell. Yeah. So as a lot of people know, Bothell has really reimagined. What's it called? It's called Bothell Highway, right?
Yeah.
And in some ways has transformed their city. In significant ways has transformed their city with a transportation-led project, but it didn't stop at transportation, right? So the way that Anat has structured this session is this idea of multi-solving. How do we solve these braided crises, these problems that are really tied in together, the climate crisis, our housing crisis, our loneliness crisis, they're all really connected, and our ability to do something about them are really connected as well. And the experience in Bothell is a really critical one for us because they were able to take this Strode and turn it into a main street. And what that does is that increased safety. It didn't reduce the throughput of cars, but it made the travel speed of cars slower. It didn't drive away business. It made a place where businesses wanted to be. It allowed people to build housing that is going to be more connected to more places. And you know, where are my people from the transit agency out here? Well, somebody's here like that, right? So there's two ways to increase ridership, right? Where you can put more service out there and hope that people come to it, or you can put more people where you already have service, right? And the land use part of this is critical. And the end result is that Bothell dramatically increased their tax base because they made it a place where more people could live, more businesses could operate, more things that we need as a people, as a society, are in a place that is more accessible for them, right? So, Kirk, tell us about the conversation in terms of Main Street highways, of how it touches the other problems, or the other opportunities. How do you mentioned housing, but all of the other, access to food, access to healthcare, the things that we need in our societies. How can Main Street highways sort of address those opportunities also?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's something, if you go to some of the communities that have redesigned these, Paulo gave the great example of Bothell. If you go up to stretches of Aurora and Shoreline, where in the early 2000s they made investments in level sidewalks along Aurora, they made investments in median islands, they made investments in more crossings, and you see the housing, the grocery stores, the more just walkable retail and investments in places that people are proud to call home. I think that's the moment where you see what this can do to really create communities and create businesses that want to be there. And for a city, that's key because it increases the tax base, gives them more investment to be able to invest in other sidewalks and other needs in their cities. When so many of these cities right now don't have the money to be able to fix these roadways on their own. Bothell was one of the rare examples where they were able to take the responsibility away from the state government. They went to the Washington State Department of Transportation, said, please give us this roadway. We want to develop it. Most communities across Washington State with these Main Street highways don't have the capacity to be able to bring that into their own city. And it was the State Department of Highways in the first place that made these roads, and now it's their turn to be responsible for them. And by doing that, we're going to create more homes, more housing, more grocery stores, more things that make a walkable community.
So I'm remembering now, Kirk, that we said that we were going to include people in this.
we got 10 minutes, Bo.
So, let's, does anybody want to join in? Yeah. We need a microphone over here, please. Here, we'll double team. We'll double team, yes. The next person. Next person after this, Mayor? Okay. All right.
Hello? It's not on.
Yeah,
it is. Awesome work, amazing. I'm a fan. One thing that I'm just as a comment more than a question, is really emphasizing quiet and noise reduction. You can even hear the difference sonically between the Shoreline Aurora part and I used to be a bus driver along that corridor, and even just with my window opening as a bus driver, you cross into Shoreline and it sounds different. So I think that's something to emphasize, is that all those improvements also make quieter cities, which is, you can hear the birds more and all that lovely kind of stuff.
Now it is.
Now it is. Hi, Adair Hawkins. I think we should be friends. We have a lot of the same hobbies and interests. The second thing is, right now, the Washington State Legislature, when I was down in Olympia and emailing and calling our representatives constantly, I think I probably annoy them at this point, their messaging is, we're not going to fund new projects because there are so many projects and roadways that need to be fixed. We're trying as a city to direct their interest is to look into safety, because we can't just fix roadways, we have to make them safer. Would you give me any feedback, advice on how to switch the conversation from, we don't have money as a state, we need to fix, what we haven't already to let's look at safety and get it funded that way. I'd love some advice.
Yeah, I think one, we have a great bucket and term that legislators are psyched about: maintenance and preservation. We know that in our transportation budget, only 2% goes to maintenance and preservation. And I really see this mega project for safety as a maintenance and preservation project. We're not building new roadways, we're redesigning and rebuilding these existing roadways. And that can fall under the maintenance and preservation budget. And this is not something new. It's investments in programs that we already have. But the real commitment is we do have to say no to things. We have to say no to some of our extremely expensive our freeway expansion projects that are eating up so much of our budget. And I think we need to take a moment and reevaluate, are these projects that were planned 25, 30 years ago the things we need to meet our climate, our community, our accessibility goals today? And I think it's going to take saying no to some of those projects that have been on the books and saying yes to this.
Marcia Cutting from Kitsap County. I want to know, how come we can't have better sidewalks? I mean, the current ones we have are wicked expensive. I'm told it costs $1 million to build a mile of sidewalks. And if you roll over them, they go boom, 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 boom. I'd rather roll on asphalt, but I'm told that it doesn't last as long. And if we could find a way to make sidewalks out of recycled plastic that were permeable, I mean, that would have solved the world's problems.
Yeah, I think this is a critical question, right? Like, how do we make stuff better, cheaper, faster? And we need to be asking these questions. Is it a different kind of material? Is it understanding that we have long-term investment, so we can make things out of asphalt and then revisit them in a shorter cycle than we would have been? I don't know, but we really need to. So, we can't just be proud of the amount of money we've allocated to something. We need to hold ourselves accountable for how many miles of good sidewalks we've put down, right? So, and that's really relative to how much the cost per mile is. We need to figure out how to make these things cheaper, and then also the user experience element is really important, right? Next question. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to come in with that user experience because we recently did a project with an agency I will not name about tactile paving. And the choices that were made were based on the manufacturing, the cost, the installation of a particular type of tactile paving, but very minimal work was done with the community to really assess if it would be effective in order to signal what it's supposed to signal, whether it was even legible on location, and whether people's actual mobility and traversability would be impacted through the installation of these pavings. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for engaging the community on how you make those choices. It's not just about procurement. And I think Thomas has been working diligently about procurement standards and how we talk about procurement in an interoperable way so that different agencies adopt interoperable procurement standards so that they can really promote this idea of not just like what does it cost, but also usability and functional operational things around the community. Sorry, I guess that's more of a comment.
Sorry, go ahead.
For those who aren't as familiar with this issue of road safety, how would you try to talk to them to try to convince them about why this is important?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, like I touched on at the beginning, I think everyone knows someone who's been in a car crash or seriously injured in a car crash, or not even that, has been on roadways that you felt stressful on, that have felt unsafe. And it's something where you think about whether it's your kids, or I think about my father in a wheelchair wanting him to be able to, him to be safe on the roadways that he's going on. And I think it's this emotional beat that people feel. And people want to live in a city and live in a state that builds accessible routes. And when it comes down to the brass tacks of it, the State Department of Transportation has an incredibly powerful slide when we look at the cost to our state in terms of people who are killed or seriously injured in our roadways. And it trumps any other costs that the Transportation Department has. And if we talk about, don't like to talk about people's lives in terms of a dollar figure, but this is something that we need to address as a state. One, because it's the right thing to do, it's the accessible thing to do, and it's going to make us just a better state going forward.
Is this one on? Let me borrow yours for a second. So there's a really great piece of advocacy that Disability Rights Washington and others have worked on over the past several years called Week Without Driving. And it's such an effective thing because it asks people that have the privilege of driving, which then absolves them from actually seeing the gaps. This is very similar to what the mayor was saying. It keeps, when people that have the privilege of driving are asked to put their car keys down and to try to get their life done over the course of a week without a car, they see what a glaring, just unbearable gap we have in our transportation system. And so what your question is a very good one because it's very easy for people to ignore this because we do this blindly. We get in our cars, we go to the places we go, we get pissed off that there's no parking, la la la, and then I'm gonna complain about the parking. But the reality is that we kill 40,000 people in our roadways every year in America, and we have no improvement on that, right? And if we're killing 40,000 people, we're maiming 10 times more people every year than that. It is a enormous crisis that we don't address. And so next year at a Week Without Driving, please ask your elected official, please ask your representative, please ask your official from your local transit agency to participate. Aaron? Yeah. More?
And yes, huge shout out to Cecilia, who has made this a worldwide event too. So that is the correct answer.
Thank you both for your work. I'm wondering over these 1,100 miles, how much is the Transportation Choices Coalition trying to make them uniform? Is that their decision? Is that WashDOT's thing? Do the local jurisdictions have much say or involvement? I'm also curious about whether this is like supposed to be lane redesign stuff or mostly just sidewalks. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. At the moment, we're agnostic about how the money, who gets the money. A lot of our work is defining the problem, defining the scale of the problem, and defining who's responsible and the approach to it. I think there's a lot of different ways that jurisdictions across the country have tackled this. But in my mind and how I envision this, if you look at a roadway like the stretch of Aurora and Shoreline, where in the early 2000s they redesigned it, there were stretches of sidewalks along that roadway, but they had driveways over them. They made you go up and down. They were just not great. And the redesign that they did there made them all level. It was a complete road redesign, and not just leaving in sidewalks when they were bad, but redesigning them to be better. And I think that's a great approach.
All right. Any more questions before lunchtime? Kunal?
There's a question from Zoom chat. Kirk, you were here yesterday. What's your plan on regulating automated vehicles or EVs to ensure safety and inclusion?
That is a fantastic question. I also think it's above my pay grade. There's a lot of folks who are doing great research on automation and EV and how to do it right. I think, especially I'll just say it's above my pay grade. It hasn't been something that we've focused on, so I'll leave it probably to a lot of other experts in the room to speak to it.
Anat?
And there's one more question. How do you navigate the complex web of funding and jurisdiction and basically for roads like Aurora? Is it something that must be done at state level or Seattle?
Yeah, it's a really good question. As I mentioned before, there are very few. Seattle is the largest city in our state. There's very few other cities that have the capacity to do a project like this in-house. WashDOT does have engineers, designers, relationships with these construction firms. I think we've seen that as we start to spin up the flywheel of WashDOT working on projects, they've continued for decades to look for more projects like they've done to be able to build. If we can start to get the teams in WashDOT working on these projects, on these Main Street highways, we can continue to get them to get better at them, continue to do more and more of them, and use their team's muscles to get these projects done. And once they're able to complete some of these, it builds that muscle memory and allows them to identify additional roadways like these to continue to work on. One other comment I'll make, I think, as we saw with the Aurora project, that was $50 million for 15 blocks of Aurora. That's a big chunk of money. And if we look at this investment of $450 million over 6 years, if we just peanut butter that across the state, that's not gonna make a lot of urgent change. But we have models in our state of how we can make a cataclysmic investment of dollars that makes a difference in one community. If you look at our community colleges, they are in just kind of a list where every year one community college knows they're going to get a huge infusion of capital dollars to build a new building. And every other college knows that they have to wait their turn, but their turn will come up. How do we potentially bring that same approach to a project like this, where one community is getting a huge infusion of $75 million a year to get that roadway project going, get that roadway project fixed, so it's not something where we're just doing a block of it at a time across the state.
That's awesome.
Okay, I got two. One, I've been really lucky working from Seattle, but getting some work throughout the state, and I'm super motivated to work with our rural communities and tribal communities. And when we, the Tasker team that's behind me, reach out to those communities, there is absolutely, with the exception of my dear friend Adir, there is a tension there about where we are putting those dollars, and there's also a tension there about potential misunderstandings about the needs of those communities. And often I find that that is a blocker to any further conversation. So do you have any ideas on how we can coalesce with these other communities, without othering them, just meaning their needs are very different. I know I need to do the work in order to assess, what pedestrian infrastructure does exist there. It's not a sidewalk. We can't call it that. When we have our discussions internal to the sidewalk collection, we have to define a totally new schema to address like what pedestrian things exist there, and they're not sidewalks. But aside from that needs assessment and the data collection, how do we establish that partnership and conversation? And I'm not sure that you know the answer. It's just a question I'm asking because it vexes me all the time.
I mean, I think there's no way to it but through it. You need to talk to people, you need to be there in the community, and we need to also not make it a referendum on whether Tanisha has a safe sidewalk or not, that her neighbors get to choose that, right? So I think that we need to be very clear that we're going in to have conversations and we're listening, but people do not get a veto on whether people have access to the things that they need in their lives, right? That is just a non-starter, right? So I think it's really, really important for us to sort of have the courage of our convictions when we think about public engagement, that we're not there to ask whether, but we're there to ask how.
The other part of the how is kind of what I was getting to before. So I think, you know, we can put our minds to it and get this legislative piece done, and then it's coming from above. And then the question is, how is it functionalized and operationalized through the agencies? And I find that by the time I get called in to do an accessibility assessment, or David Miller online gets called in to do his accessibility assessment, we're like past Plan B. Funding was already allocated. We know who's going to do the construction. There's no chance for a modification to even improve, you know, one stair, right? Is there a way for us to have a partnership around that and how things get operationalized at the agency level so that we don't come to these impasses?
Yeah, I think it is a great opportunity when.
Can we have easier questions than
Yeah,
that?
yeah,
This is
Clara has a comment.
I have a comment. I mean, I don't even know if I should, wow. I don't even know. Okay, I'll just say a few things. So I think your question is really important. I think it's something that a lot of people have, which is how do we get engagement and understanding about projects on the front end and not when they're already partly planned and designed. And so I know that as part of the HEAL Act, which is the Healthy Environments for All Act, which is a statewide act that affects statewide departments. So the Department of Transportation is one of them. Community engagement is a huge part of environmental justice. And so one of the things that has been happening is a lot more work around community engagement and how that fits into these established processes that have been entrenched in these systems for decades. And so I think that, but I appreciate what you said about this accessibility assessment, because I think that that's something that I'd like to kind of take back to them and say, like, let's also make sure that that piece is more specifically called out. But I think it's a really important question. And I also wanted to add that Complete Streets is a law for state highways. So if a state highway is being looked at and the cost is more than $500,000, which usually would be, then Complete Streets needs to be assessed on that roadway, which means crossings and sidewalks. And I know someone asked about like roadway redesign. So like what we'll call is like a roadway reallocation. Some people know it as a road diet. And so I think that those are all things that can help contribute to some of the conversations that they're having. I don't want to get too deep into it, but I'm happy to share what I do know and understand.
I think, yeah, just my one comment is it's a really hard question, and we know really well the ways to not do it. Like, we look at the freeways that have been built in our communities. We also look to Paulo's question, how we've given so many communities vetoes over doing anything and making any improvements in our communities. Finding the right way is probably going to be a lifetime process for all of us, and it's how do we learn and how do we practice it going forward, especially when we're talking about trying to win cataclysmic investments of dollars in communities.
I think you mean catalytic.
Sorry, yes.
Cataclysmic investment, and we've already done.
Yeah.
But you know, yesterday there was a lot of conversation around standards, and we were talking about data standards, and we were talking, and it was fascinating, right? That standards kind of unleash a lot of ability for people downstream to add on and to expand, there's this really exciting thing about the GTFS standard kind of naturally propagating because it made sense for the transit agencies to put them out. And so I think that for us to make the transformational change that we want to make here, and again, I really want to stress this, we don't want to just make transformational investments, we need transformational outcomes, right? For us to be able to do this, we really need to figure out, not reinvent the wheel every time, like get better at doing it over time and bake in a NOTS evaluation into the very beginning of project development at WashDOT, right? Bake in all of these things and have standards that can be added to, and not undo a project when it's already done because we've forgotten to do this work in the beginning that we needed to have done earlier. Mayor?
I have the answer. So this is what the Snoqualmie tribe did. So there's something called this, I want to use examples, Snoqualmie Valley Governments Association. So it's North Bend, Snoqualmie, unincorporated King County, Carnation, Duval, the Snoqualmie tribe. And the Snoqualmie tribe came to our meeting and said, they gave us a presentation. They said, look, we need cities to please go ahead and ask us before you build on things, because sometimes it's a burial ground and we just don't know. So they actually went through the process, and it's because no one knew who to contact. So to speak to what you're saying, once any city or entity gets a grant and there are plans, we're not allowed to change them. So I think the best thing to do would just to be contact the cities, the city planners, and say, I am here, I am a specialist in this, I am here to help, and they'll have that contact. Honestly, I feel like everyone here is doing such incredible work, but there's no money for advertising how much you do or the process. So thank you for doing that. So contact the city planners, let them know who you are. Thanks.
Seems so simple. I'm sure. Oh, yes.
One quick comment that I think is kind of related to a few of these last comments, which is in government work in the last few years, it's been very frequent that we've had these conversations about the need to move from community outreach to community engagement, that we need to stop talking at people and start to talk with people. But frankly, oftentimes we have these long internal conversations about how we're going to do engagement, and we spend more time preparing this engagement than we, like designing these conversations that ultimately then are still taking place in the context of that phase after the initiation of the project. And we need to build relationships, not have events with people. So we need to have that conversation before we're even in the city. And we shouldn't be having necessarily long conversations internally about how to do engagement. We should just call them and introduce ourselves. We should take the bus out there and walk around and meet people and build those relationships and be in that community and be part of that community.
What does it take to change that within an organization?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Tom Hewitt, SDOT ADA Coordinator and Program Manager. I feel like I would kick myself in the butt if I didn't speak up, because we were talking about standards. And I'm a GIS nerd, but also we talk about built environment standards. And earlier we were talking about how it takes a while to change standards, right, to go through the formal processes. But you know what is something that could be done before that? You could still have guidelines and guidance and best practices. The ADA is the minimum, right? It's the floor, it's not the ceiling. We're talking a lot about tactile treatments, which I want to plug. SDOT is doing a tactile walking surface indicator pilot. So if anybody wants to test out, and we need feedback from all different users, please reach out. You can Google my name on the internet. But it goes back to consistency in guidelines and making it usable for everybody. We talk about complete streets, but I'm in the trenches, dealing with these issues on a day-to-day basis. When we talk about sidewalks, But then there's another big aspect that we're very big advocates on, and that's tree protection in trees. But when you're talking about very limited space for the pedestrian environment, but you have a 4 or 5 lane road, well, we can only do so much, right? You know, and I'm always gonna tell folks, tree people don't like this. I'm gonna be like, get rid of the tree. We can plant 3 more somewhere else. I wanna make sure we have an accessible route for our people using our sidewalks. And, you know, so it's just a matter of getting into that early phase. You know, we're still guilty of it. You know, we'll be reviewing plans at the 90% and we'll provide recommendations for other treatments. The 2 things I always hear, 1, it's too late, and 2, where does it say we need to do this? And that's always the biggest problem, especially with tactile treatments and things like that. Curb ramps, you know, that's pretty standardized in the triggers, but we can always be better, you know, like directionality, directional curb ramps, providing other tactile cues for people of all ages and abilities to use. So, you know, one thing I guess is a comment is, you know, talking to your jurisdiction, you know, let them know. You know, you can build, you know, design guidance. Unfortunately, with the regime in DC, I don't think PROAG is going to be adopted anytime soon in its entirety. The transit part has been adopted, but you know, it doesn't mean, you know, as municipalities can't go above and beyond. And so again, you know, talking with what the mayor said about reaching out, having comments, it helps me immensely as the ADA coordinator to say, not only do I believe that this is the right way to do things, but here are the constituents that I've talked to and their lived experiences on how to make a true complete streets project or how to make a truly inclusive, you know, project for folks to use. You know, I'll also say in closing, I know, you know, I'm a soldier in the war on cars. But you know, there are other aspects where you know we can go above and beyond, like accessible passenger loading zones and other accessible parking. So even though we want to eliminate parking minimums and stuff like that, which I'm all for, let's not be not understand how everyone gets to a site. And when we're talking about autonomous vehicles, we can still have that, but have accessible passenger loading zones. Again, going beyond the minimum to make sure we're making a fully inclusive right of way for everyone. So, thank you.
Matthew Weider, King County Metro. I think one of the things like Thomas was talking about is we can't just talk at people. We have to have a conversation with people. And one of the things that we've been discussing internally is how do we, instead of every time there's a project, just do the thing where we go out and we have a poster session and we invite people to go to a website and they're really cool systems to comment on mega projects, but it's still not a conversation. And so how do we take some of the lessons that we see, say, from like internet culture, like hosting an Ask Me Anything, like every single quarter, so that people have a venue to ask questions and get feedback, not just in those specific periods where we're going out for a project, but to actually develop a conversation that is ongoing with the public so that they know what we're working on and they can express their concerns at any point in time. And like, I think the Washington State Parks Instagram account is like an amazing example of how you can really have a conversation and integrate yourself into people's lives, not only in an informative way, but also in a humorous way. And so, I think we in the public domain have a lot of catching up to do because there's a lot of private companies that have paved this type of conversation ahead of us. And we need to adopt and adapt to some of those tactics so that we are just as relevant to people's lives as, say, Tide detergent is.
Agreed. You know what all this question about public engagement is so critical. But what worries me is when we walk in the room without a point of view, right? Like, I'm just here to tell you. But when, so in this, I talked a lot about my experience at Children's. It was really formative and but it really, there was no way we were going to be successful in the goals that we had promised that we were going to meet in order to build this hospital. There was no way that we were going to be successful and continue to not raise parking rates and subsidize parking to the extent that we were. And that was an incredibly unpopular thing to say, right? Over time, we're going to raise parking rates to market rates, and we're going to reevaluate every year. And I'm going to work my ass off to make it really easy for you to get here by transit. We're gonna take biking and walking and these crossing improvements that we're making really seriously as part of this project. But the reality is that parking is not free. Subsidized parking makes it impossible for us to reach our goals. So that is just a given in this project that we're doing together. And I had to stand there in front of people and take the heat, and people cried, and it was a big uproar, and it was this acute reaction, and then people got used to it. Right? So what I think that our problem with community engagement is that we're afraid to come into the room with a point of view, being transparent, and we're afraid to also withstand the acute reaction. And we lose the courage of our convictions too soon. Now, if you have a shitty project, it's a shitty project, and people are going to be mad with you, mad forever, right? But the reality is that we are making, with this mega project for Main Street highways, there is a point of view here, which is we are going to save lives, we're going to improve these communities and increase their ability to get their needs met where they are, right? That should be the starting point. And then we have community engagement about where we're going to put the tactile strips, about how, whether we have more room for trees or more room for where people are going to roll. But we need to come into this with a clear-eyed view of what the outcome is.
Yeah, and I think on the public side, we need to tell our elected officials what we want them to do. Like, we need to demand this, and they need to hear from us, and that's key.
Is it lunchtime yet?
It is.
Okay. So call to action.
One, thank you all so much for hearing out this idea. Thank you so much for being here. And please, if you can, go to transportationchoicescoalition.org. We have our action alert up there. Now is a critical time for the Senate Transportation Committee to hear your support of this idea. And we will keep you in the loop of what happens next week after they go through conference. But no matter what happens this session, we're going to work off to make sure it gets in there. Your help will be so valuable. If not, we're going to make sure this investment in these roadways get fixed and improved.
And we're going to ride on Kirk's tailcoats and say, please fund the second half of the OS Connect project so we can understand where our sidewalks are and we can make really usable data about the pedestrian network available to everybody in the state. Thank you so much. Thanks. And we'll be here all week. Tell your friends.
So before everybody rushes the lunch, I want you to join me in thanking both of you, like beyond just galvanizing the conversation, bringing everybody out to the conversation. And I'm so excited that you were here. Thank you.